The Cleveland Browns didn't just win a football game, they may have crossed a line they can't walk back from. Because after what happened last weekend, the conversation around Shedeur Sanders shifted in a way that feels irreversible. Not louder, not more emotional, just more serious. The kind of serious that forces organizations to make decisions they weren't ready for yet. For months, the Browns have tried to keep things vague, non-committal, safe. Every question about the future at quarterback was met with corporate language and carefully chosen words. But suddenly, that safety net is gone, and it didn't disappear because of a press conference or a front office leak. It disappeared because of what people inside the building and people who have seen the films started saying out loud. See, this wasn't supposed to happen this fast. Shedeur Sanders was supposed to be a long-term project, a developmental piece, someone you talk about in hypotheticals, not certainties. But when a rookie starts stacking wins under conditions most quarterbacks don't survive, timelines collapse. And that's exactly what has Cleveland on edge right now. What made this moment different wasn't just the stat line. It wasn't even the win itself. It was the context. A battered offense, missing weapons, protection breaking down. And still, the Browns walked away with a dub and a growing problem. Because every time Shedeur answers another question on the field, the questions off the field get louder. Fans feel it. Media voices feel it. And now, even the locker room is starting to feel it. There's a certain point where patience turns into hesitation, where waiting too long becomes its own kind of mistake. And the Browns may be inching closer to that point without realizing it. Because once the people around a quarterback start believing in him publicly, the organization loses control of the narrative. That's the part nobody planned for. Behind the scenes, there's tension building, not chaos, but pressure. The kind that doesn't explode all at once. It just keeps stacking. Every rep, every win, every clip that circulates online, every analyst who watches the tape and pauses a little longer than they expected to. And here's the thing. This isn't just about Shedeur proving he belongs. It's about whether Cleveland is willing to admit they already have their answer, even if it wasn't the answer they wanted at first. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to stay locked in on all the latest NFL drama, make sure you hit that like button. It helps the video reach more people who love this content just like you. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another update, reaction, or storyline as it unfolds in real time. I also want to hear from you in the comments. What do you think about Shedeur Sanders' performance and the Browns' collapse? Drop your thoughts below and let's talk about it. And don't forget to share this video with friends who follow the NFL. Your support truly keeps the channel moving forward. Because when teammates start speaking up, when former players start nodding along, and when even critics are forced to soften their tone, that's when decisions stop being optional. And what happened next only made that pressure impossible to ignore. Once the locker room whispers reached the surface, the media response didn't explode, it evolved. And that distinction matters. This wasn't a wave of hype built on emotion. It was something more dangerous for Cleveland. A slow, deliberate shift in tone from voices that don't usually give rookies the benefit of the doubt. Skip Bayless was one of the first to nudge the conversation in a new direction, not with blind praise, not with exaggeration, but with something far more telling: balance. When he handed Shedeur Sanders an A- for his performance, it wasn't just about the grade. It was about why he gave it, and more importantly, what he said around it. Skip didn't ignore the mistakes. He went out of his way to point them out. The interceptions, the decisions that a veteran quarterback simply doesn't make. But instead of using those moments to discredit Shedeur, he framed them as part of a much larger reality, one most quarterbacks would struggle to survive. He called it the highest degree of difficulty in the league. That phrase changed everything, because it reframed the entire evaluation. Shedeur wasn't being judged against ideal conditions. He was being judged against chaos, a coaching situation that didn't fully embrace him, protection that consistently collapsed, and a supporting cast that ranked near the bottom by every serious metric. And yet, the Browns still walked away with a win. That's not an excuse, That's context. And once context enters the conversation, narratives lose their grip. Former players followed. Analysts who normally stay neutral began leaning in, not declaring him the future, but acknowledging something they couldn't ignore anymore. The progress was real. The poise was showing up. The command of the offense looked different. Not perfect, but intentional. What made this moment dangerous for Cleveland wasn't the praise itself. It was the agreement. When multiple voices with different agendas arrive at the same conclusion, it stops being noise. It becomes a signal. Even the critiques shifted. Instead of "he's not ready," the tone became, "this can't keep happening." Not about Shedeur failing, but about how much he was being asked to overcome. The conversation moved from if he could be the guy to how much more proof does he need to give. And that's a tough place for an organization to live. Because once respected analysts start saying things like, "the Browns may have already found their answer," it forces the front office into a defensive posture. Silence becomes suspicious. Patience starts to feel like denial. The media didn't crown Shedeur. They didn't need to. All they did was remove the doubt that used to protect Cleveland from making a decision. And that's when the tape started doing the talking, frame by frame, play by play, in ways even skeptics couldn't explain away. Here's the part that keeps getting glossed over. The situation Shedeur Sanders walked into wasn't just difficult. It was borderline unworkable. And that matters, because quarterback evaluations rarely account for how broken the environment actually is. From the start, the odds weren't neutral. Reports have suggested the coaching staff wasn't fully aligned on drafting him in the first place. That alone changes everything. When a quarterback isn't your guy, patience runs thin faster. Mistakes feel heavier. Success gets downplayed, and every rep becomes a quiet audition instead of a learning moment. Then there's the protection, or lack of it. By nearly every grading metric, Cleveland's offensive line has hovered at or near the bottom of the league in pass protection. That's not a minor flaw, that's a structural problem. Defenders are in the backfield before routes even develop. Pocket integrity disappears. Reads get rushed. And young quarterbacks pay the price for things they can't control. Yet that's the backdrop Shedeur has been operating under. It doesn't stop there. The receiving group hasn't exactly been set up to help a rookie settle in either. Rankings have consistently placed the Browns' receiving core near the bottom as well. Separation is inconsistent. Timing windows shrink. And when the margin for error is already thin, that becomes a nightmare. This is where most rookie quarterbacks unravel. They start pressing, they force throws, they lose command of the offense, but instead of spiraling, Shedeur adapted. He shortened his decision-making, extended plays when he had to, took hits that weren't supposed to be part of the job description. And that's what's gone largely unspoken. Evaluators love to talk about arm talent and accuracy. They rarely talk about survival. But survival is a skill, and Shedeur has been forced to develop it early. Every snap has been a test of composure more than talent, a test of whether he can stay mentally sharp while everything around him collapses. That's why the mistakes look the way they do. Not reckless, pressured. The kind of errors that happen when a quarterback feels like he has to be perfect just to keep the offense alive. And yet, despite all of this, the Browns are still winning games with him under center. That's the uncomfortable truth. Not because the system is working, but because he's compensating for what isn't. And that distinction matters when projecting a quarterback's future. Because if this is what he looks like in a broken environment, it raises an obvious question. What happens if the environment improves? Cleveland hasn't wanted to ask that question yet, but the more Shedeur survives these impossible situations, the harder it becomes to avoid. And just when it felt like the challenge couldn't get steeper, it somehow did. If the situation was already stacked against him, this was the moment it tipped from difficult to absurd. Because right when Shedeur Sanders started settling into the game, everything he could lean on disappeared, almost all at once. It began with the tight ends. David Njoku was already sidelined, leaving a noticeable hole in the middle of the field. Then, early in the game, Harold Fannin Jr. Shedeur's most reliable target went down after hauling in a touchdown. Reports said he aggravated a lingering groin issue and was done for the day. Just like that, the security blanket was gone. That matters more than people realize. For a young quarterback, tight ends aren't just pass catchers. They're safety valves. They're the answer when the play breaks down and the defense wins the first 2 seconds. Fannin had been exactly that. He led the team in targets, catches, and trust. Losing him mid-game wasn't just losing production, it was losing familiarity. And it didn't stop there. The run game never stabilized. With Quinshon Judkins already lost for the season, there was no reliable outlet when the pressure mounted. No easy checkdown to reset the offense. No steady rhythm to slow down the pass rush. Everything became more predictable, and predictable offenses get punished. By the second quarter, Shedeur was throwing to players most fans didn't expect to see on the field. Practice squad tight ends. Backup receivers rotating in and out. Timing that had barely been repped in meaningful situations. This wasn't a next man up scenario. This was a patchwork offense held together by instinct. That's when quarterbacks usually fold. Because the margin for error disappears. Every throw has to be perfect. Every read has to be immediate. And every mistake gets magnified. Defenses sense it. They tighten coverage. They attack protection schemes they know can't hold up. And yet, Shedeur stayed aggressive without panicking. He didn't abandon the pocket prematurely. He didn't go into survival mode and stop pushing the ball. He adjusted, shortened reads, trusted placement over power, made throws that required timing rather than chemistry. That's a subtle distinction, but a critical one. This wasn't about highlight plays. It was about keeping the offense functional when the structure collapsed. About managing chaos without letting it dictate the outcome. And while the stat sheet doesn't scream dominance, the context tells a different story. Because this wasn't a game, he was supposed to win. Not with depleted personnel, not with protection breaking down, not with his most trusted targets unavailable. And yet, when the clock hit 0, Cleveland had the dub. That's when the conversation shifted again. Because when a quarterback keeps producing after everything is taken away, evaluation changes. It stops being about what he lacks and starts being about what he refuses to lose. And the moments that followed only made that contrast sharper. No matter how composed the performance was, this was the part everyone rushed to argue about. The clips that looped on timelines. The throws slowed down frame by frame. The moments that instantly split opinion right down the middle. The interceptions. For some, they were proof that Shedeur Sanders isn't ready. For others, they were exactly what you expect from a rookie being asked to carry too much, too soon. And the truth, like most things, lived somewhere in between. The first pick barely registered inside the building, even if it went viral outside of it. Pressure came through immediately. The pocket collapsed before the route fully developed. Shedeur took the hit as he released, and the ball floated just enough for a defender to step in front. On the stat sheet, it's an interception. On film, it's a consequence of timing being destroyed at the worst possible moment. That distinction matters, but it doesn't trend well online. The second interception was different, and that's where the debate heated up. Early in the fourth quarter, with the game still tight, Shedeur glanced across the field and locked onto a veteran receiver flashing his hands. It was a familiar mistake, trusting experience, forcing a throw that didn't need to be forced. The defense read it the entire way, and the ball never had a chance. That one was on him. And to his credit, nobody tried to spin it. Analysts called it what it was, a bad decision driven by urgency. The kind that disappears with experience but shows up when a young quarterback feels responsible for everything. What followed mattered more than the mistake itself. There was no visible unraveling, no panicked body language, no sudden drop in confidence. Shedeur didn't start playing scared. He didn't retreat into checkdowns or force hero throws to make up for it. He reset and kept the offense moving. That's what split the conversation. Some fans saw the interceptions and stopped watching. Others saw the response and leaned in. Because quarterbacks aren't defined by whether they make mistakes, they're defined by how they play after them. And that's where Shedeur quietly separated himself. The internet thrives on absolutes, bust or star, ready or not, but games don't unfold that cleanly. This one didn't either. It was messy, imperfect, pressured, and still productive. That's why the reactions felt so polarized. People weren't arguing about the throws, they were arguing about what they meant. Were they warning signs or growing pains? The answer depends on whether you evaluate quarterbacks in isolation or in context. And once analysts started choosing context, the conversation shifted again, this time toward the film itself. Because when the tape rolled, it told a story the box score couldn't. Once the emotion cooled and the hot takes burned out, the conversation moved to the only place it ever really settles, the film room. And that's where opinions began to change, not dramatically, but decisively. Former quarterbacks and analysts didn't see a reckless rookie on tape. They saw something far more encouraging, processing, not perfect, not polished, but faster, cleaner, intentional. One throw in particular kept coming up. Rolling left with pressure chasing him, Shedeur recognized he couldn't escape the pocket. Instead of drifting or panicking, he flipped his hips, reset his base, and delivered a strike to the corner route. That's not arm talent, that's mechanics under stress. The kind young quarterbacks usually don't master until much later. Then there were the timing throws. After Fannin went down, the offense had every excuse to stall. Instead, Shedeur started trusting windows rather than targets. Quick curls, in cuts, throws released before receivers fully cleared. Those plays don't show up as highlights, but they show trust in the system and trust in his reads. Analysts pointed out something subtle but important. The double hitches disappeared. Early in the season, hesitation showed up. This time, decisions were made on schedule. When the look was there, the ball came out. When it wasn't, he moved on. That's growth you don't fake. Even the touchdown pass that drew criticism told a deeper story on replay. The read was correct. The placement was affected by pressure crashing into him mid-throw. The choice itself wasn't flawed, the environment was, and evaluators noticed the difference. The mistakes were still there. Nobody denied that. A missed-out route. A base that got a little too narrow under interior pressure. But these weren't breakdowns. They were technical corrections, the kind coaches can work with. That's when the tone shifted. Because raw talent excites fans. Process excites evaluators. And the tape showed a quarterback beginning to control the game instead of reacting to it. Beginning to manipulate defenders with his eyes. Beginning to protect receivers with placement. Most importantly, the film showed something that doesn't get measured. Calm. No rushing through progressions. No frantic footwork after mistakes. No visible drop in confidence when the offense faced adversity. Just composure, snap after snap, in a situation that rarely rewards it. That's why analysts stopped arguing about whether he could play. They started talking about consistency, about polish, about how close he actually is. And when that happens, the conversation leaves theory behind. Because if the film says he's trending in the right direction, the question becomes unavoidable. How long can Cleveland afford to treat this like an experiment? Especially with what's coming next. That's where Cleveland finds itself now, not in crisis, but in a dilemma they didn't plan on facing this soon. Because Shedeur Sanders hasn't forced a decision with noise or controversy. He's done it the uncomfortable way, by steadily removing excuses. The Browns can still say all the right things. They can talk about development, patience, and competition. On paper, that sounds responsible. But behind the scenes, timelines are tightening. And the more Shedeur plays like this, the harder it becomes to justify waiting without a clear reason. This isn't about crowning him the future overnight. It's about acknowledging momentum, and momentum doesn't ask for permission. Fans are already there. The reaction isn't emotional hype anymore. It's expectation. When mistakes happen, they don't turn on him. They contextualize them. When he succeeds, they treat it as confirmation, not surprise. That shift matters more than any stat line. The media has followed. Not with declarations, but with questions Cleveland doesn't want to answer yet. What more do you need to see? At what point does progress become proof? Silence works when doubt exists. It doesn't work when doubt fades. Then there's the locker room. Teammates don't lobby publicly unless they feel something changing. That kind of belief spreads quietly but firmly. It shows up in body language, in effort, in how players respond when things break down. Quarterbacks don't just run offenses, they stabilize environments. And that's exactly what Shedeur has started doing. For the front office, that creates pressure without confrontation. No ultimatums, no headlines, just a growing sense that delaying the inevitable might cost more than embracing it. Because the longer this goes on, the more awkward the alternative becomes. If Shedeur keeps stacking competent performances, not even great ones, the argument against him thins out. At some point, choosing someone else becomes a statement of denial rather than evaluation. That's the trap Cleveland is approaching. They don't need him to be elite. They just need him to be steady. And right now, steady might be enough to reshape the entire plan for 2026. Which raises the question nobody, inside the building, wants to say out loud yet. What happens if he plays one more game like this? Because at that point, it won't be fans or analysts applying pressure. It will be reality. And reality doesn't wait for consensus. And that's what makes this moment so uncomfortable for Cleveland. There's no dramatic breaking point. No single play that forces a decision. No headline that screams, "This is it." Just a steady build-up that feels impossible to stop once it starts. Shedeur Sanders hasn't demanded anything. He hasn't called anyone out. He hasn't tried to control the narrative. He's simply shown up, week after week, and handled situations most young quarterbacks aren't asked to survive. And in doing so, he's quietly changed the conversation around him. This story was never supposed to move this fast. He was meant to develop in the background, to learn without pressure, to exist in theory rather than reality. But reality has a way of speeding things up when preparation meets opportunity. And now, the Browns are staring at a future they didn't fully plan for, one where the answer at quarterback might already be in the building. What happens next doesn't depend on perfection. It depends on direction. If Shedeur takes another step forward, not a breakout, not a masterpiece, just another composed performance, the debate shifts again. Not from "can he do it?" but from "why wouldn't you let him?" And that's a much harder question to deflect. Because at some point, evaluation turns into accountability. Cleveland can choose patience. They can choose caution. They can choose to wait for absolute certainty. But football doesn't reward hesitation at quarterback. It rewards conviction, even when that conviction feels uncomfortable. The most dangerous part of this situation isn't that Shedeur might fail. It's that he might succeed just enough to expose indecision, just enough to make delay look like fear instead of strategy. And that's the irony. The Browns have spent years searching for stability under center. Now that it might be forming in front of them, the challenge isn't finding it. It's recognizing it before it's too late. This isn't about hype, it's about timing. And timing has a way of turning quiet moments into defining ones. Because when organizations miss their window, they don't lose loudly. They lose slowly, one decision they didn't make when they had the chance. And Cleveland may be closer to that moment than anyone wants to admit.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.